Hey all, WebCamParrot here, with a video topic that I am very passionate about covering, and is something I have wanted to do for quite some time. I think I've said this a few times, but my first DC Multiverse video is the video that I am most proud of, and today I wanted to expand on the groundwork that I laid out there with this video. Sometimes I will make a video because I think you guys will like it. You know, I want my viewers to watch something that is entertaining. But this particular video is more just because I have fun making it, because I wanted to make it, not because I expect it to do well. But hopefully you guys like it anyway. I want to go over some cosmological structures that I missed or was vague on in the previous video, particularly structures that go past or outside of creation and reside elsewhere in the overvoid. There is a lot of potential for weird and wacky stuff out there because of how far removed it is from the stuff that we usually see. In my first cosmology video, I mostly covered how tall the cosmology is, you know, as in like how many transcendent realms there are, but these future videos are going to be more focused on like how wide the cosmology is. So all the realms, you know, out in the overvoid other than creation and stuff like that. And I might talk about like all the realms in the God Sphere in a different video, for instance. The first thing I want to talk about is a cosmological structure that I have only touched on briefly in the past, that being the Dark Multiverse. It's a lot larger and further away than you might have thought. I'm sure a lot of you have seen these two scans where Barry is talking about the DC Multiverse map, and flips it over to its black backside, revealing this to be the Dark Multiverse. There is more truth to this analogy than you might realise. It sounds like he's saying the Dark Multiverse is massive, you know, seems like it's a lot bigger than the other side of the map, which is true for the most part, if we don't count the overvoid. When Mandrak was thrown from the edge of creation by the Thought robot, he fell past the Sourcewall down into the overvoid, and then eventually landed in the Dark Multiverse, meaning that the Dark Multiverse must be past the Sourcewall. The Dark Multiverse is a realm of infinite nightmares, out far past the Source. It is the realm of all fears and possibilities. These possibilities and fears remained dormant until the Sourcewall was broken, and then they started to wake up, mutating into something more. Creation is like a fishbowl in the ocean compared to the Dark Multiverse, and the evidence of this could not be more clear. We see that the Dark Multiverse contains realities imposing enough to contain their own dark side, their own sources, and even their own anti-monitors. There are stories of the Dark Multiverse within Lucian's library in the Dreaming, and even just reading them threatens to burn the entire library down. Despite the massiveness of this structure, it is surrounded by a realm far larger. This is the Shadowlands, and it is where the Great Darkness was displaced to when the light of creation first formed. As a result, the Dark Multiverse shares this space with the Great Darkness itself. A mere fraction of the Great Darkness encountered in Swamp Thing Volume 2 was the match of the Presence itself, but the full beast is far more terrifying. It goes by many names: the Great Darkness, the Great Evil Beast, the Dark World, the Abyss, the Other Place, and is said to be the true source of all magic. A mere piece of it had threatened to tear down heaven and creation in the past. It manifests portions of its being into the other kind, including the mighty and terrifying Upside Down Man, who himself is the dark opposite to the collective unconscious, a manifestation of all terrible possibilities. Despite this power, it's difficult for the other kind to cross the gap into creation, partly because of the vast distances involved, and partly because of the barrier placed there by Hecate. It took the Tree of Wonder to bridge the gap between creation and this vast being, demonstrating just how far away the Dark Multiverse, Great Darkness, and Shadowlands really are out there in the overvoid. It is important to remember that a small piece of the full Great Darkness is considered equal and opposite to the collective unconscious, which I will cover now. As I have talked about in my presence video at great length, the collective unconscious is the force from which the presence himself has sprung. I went to a lot of trouble to prove that without a doubt in that video, so I won't go into it too much here. I will also quickly mention that there is far more than just one collective unconscious. In fact, there are many, but the most powerful and important of these is the collective unconscious sprung from the minds of humanity and those on Earth. And I will talk about why that is later. Many beings other than the presence have been born from the collective unconscious. Most, admittedly, are far less powerful than he is. The beings within the God sphere being a prime example. These gods will exist as long as belief in them exists, and they will starve without it. As a result, these gods will shift and change to match the availability of belief being sent to them. Blight was formed from the negative thoughts festering in the minds of all humans, and as such cannot be slain by one even as powerful as the presence, as it would be tantamount to slaying himself. Trigon is a being born from the dark thoughts of the people of Azarath, a realm which I will cover later in this video. It is for this reason that prayer is often called the most powerful force in the universe. Heaven and hell themselves are shaped from the beliefs of even just one individual. Each man creates their own hell, and beyond the gates of the afterlife is where your true infinite self lies. This is what the soul or mind is in DC, an archetypal form residing in the God sphere, creating entire realities there in a place where even simple things like cherubs or rocks are Platonic archetypal objects. In fact, the soul itself is directly referred to as archetypal many times. This is what the dreaming is as well, a realm created wholesale from the dreams of humans and other beings. Dream essence itself can be directly turned into magic by beings like the Lords of Order and Chaos, which is why Hecate is often viewed not only as the god of belief, but also magic. It's even possible to view magic as kind of like a distillation of belief itself, that the collective unconscious is magic in its like most pure form. The collective unconscious itself is the realm of Hecate, but they are also one and the same. Without Hecate, there would be no dreams, no gods, no dreaming, no magic, no Morpheus, and her dark opposite is the Upside Down Man. This power is so immense that it can reshape all of creation, and what we would consider fundamental forces in science are yoked and constrained by individual thoughts themselves. Incredibly powerful telepaths, the example given in this case being Martian Manhunter, are said to be capable of manipulating the collective unconscious itself, and it is one of the 7 forces given to Perpetua to shape creation. People have asked me to explain the relationship between the presence and Perpetua, and this is my best explanation for it. Something that is looked at as a tool by Perpetua is the very force responsible for creating the presence. She even created her own dark version of the collective unconscious, making it one of the 7 dark forces. I should also make it clear that there are tons of creation myths that exist within the collective unconscious, and it's explicitly stated that the only reason these myths still exist and have some truth to them, like the reason they have power within the collective unconscious, is just because it amuses Hecate for them to be there. And this includes the creation myth surrounding the presence and other beings like this. So this is why there's a seeming contradiction between the creation story we know about Perpetua and the creation story that we know about other beings like the presence. It's just because Hecate allows these myths to exist, and because they exist as a belief, they have a certain amount of truth to them. But they're still superseded by whatever Perpetua has done. And this goes for other seemingly contradictory statements about the presence, like the one that we recently got in death metal as well. It's just being told to us from a perspective of myth, just like the numerous other creation stories that Hecate allows because they amuse her. It's possible that I might change my mind on this if more stuff comes out to support this particular argument, but at the moment it's just heavily contradictory to so many things that we know about in DC already, so it makes more sense to call it another one of these myths. For those of you that are fans of like the classic Lucifer and Sandman stuff as well, you should have a pretty big issue with this statement, because it kind of creates a lot of problems as well. Like, for instance, Perpetua is the one who like ultimately created things like the Godsphere, which contains hell where Lucifer lives. And not only that, the presence lives in heaven, which is also in the Godsphere. Like, this is pretty incongruent with what we know about Lucifer and Michael, right? Like, we see Lucifer and Michael create all of creation, but Perpetua is just like also there as well, like sprung from the source. Like, it's not like Michael and Lucifer just like pooped out a source and then left. Like, no, they did actually go in and make everything, and they also live in there. So during this whole like affair, like, where's Perpetua? Why is she not important? Why is she seemingly like this creator but never like created anything? It's a little weird. But it makes total sense if you explain everything using the collective unconscious like I have been, and you say that this thing regarding Perpetua coming from the source is just another one of those creation myths that Hecate allows to exist. Only the truly most grand telepaths are able to touch the collective unconscious meaningfully, like Maxwell Lord, who used it to wipe his existence from the memories of everyone on Earth. Starro, who I covered in another video, or the amped up Mr. Mind I talked about in my Booster Gold video, who threatened to consume the collective unconscious entirely, are both good examples. In this same storyline, it was stated that once the collective unconscious had been consumed, that the rest of creation would be left to rot without it. The likely most powerful of these beings are known as the Trans. They are a race of eldritch beings that consume the collective unconscious of entire races, pulling it into their being and kind of taking it over like a virus. The highest realm, or most pure state of the collective unconscious, is sometimes called the imaginal realms, a cosmic sea of symbols, archetypes, and dreams, and it is from here that the Trans unleash their attacks. The imaginal realm is so immense that even a spectre with the full power of the Logos, the strongest spectre we have ever seen, who wields a not insignificant portion of the Presence's power himself, was still completely out of his depth there against the Trans. Batman also considered the imaginal realms to be a theoretical place, or hypothetical even, that may not even exist, and this says a lot considering, he's aware of the fifth dimension and the Godsphere and stuff like that. It's clearly like a far more distant and confusing place than these other realms. Admittedly, the Spectre was kind of inexperienced with these powers, but even so, it's still kind of impressive that he was out of his depth there. Just the lower emanations of the Trans would have erased everything that the Spectre and Hal Jordan ever was, ever could be, and ever had been. Even when fused with the entire Justice League, the Trans were able to simply create a stronger, more brutal twin of the Spectre, with Martian Manhunter saying that they were not combating the disease, only the symptom. Fighting the Trans is virtually impossible, as even their mere thoughts adapt to face you, making your own self-imposed limitations your greatest weakness. The prefix trans is often used to refer to something beyond or above. So to be called the Trans is to just be called the Beyond, which is actually kind of a cool name despite how goofy or off it originally sounds. The true, real form of the Trans is known as Trans One, who planned to effectively download themselves into the minds of every human, taking them over, like I said before, as a virus. The Spectre would eventually channel humanity's belief of the Justice League, along with his own belief in them, to drive the Trans One back from their collective unconscious, with the Trans specifically noting that humanity had a uniquely powerful collective unconscious. Despero, a powerful telepath in his own right, also comments on humanity's unique minds, calling Earth far more diverse in its thinking than other planets, which is what made it special. Eclipso killed the Presence by severing his connection to the collective unconscious, and Earth with him, specifically commenting that Earth was the most important planet in the universe because of this. Trigon was also defeated in a similar manner by Raven when she channeled the collective unconscious of Azarath to defeat him. Ares, empowered by the God Wave, was likewise defeated by the collective unconscious, channeled by a wide variety of heroes. The imaginal realms, also known as the Third Kingdom or the Kingdom of Imagination, would appear again in Animal Man along with a villain very similar to the trans known as the Spider Queen. As I've talked about before on this channel on more than one occasion, Animal Man was able to reshape the source itself using imagination or the fifth dimension, which he accessed through the morphogenetic field, which itself is contained within the Red. The Red is then only a sliver of the original light and darkness, presumably referring to the Great Darkness and the Presence. And then the Presence is simply one part of the collective unconscious that makes up the imaginal realms. The Spider Queen, much like the trans, comes from outside of the Three Kingdoms and is essentially a living idea. It's actually directly called a meme in this story. Obviously, like, what meme means these days is kind of very different from what it originally meant in the 80s when Richard Dawkins came up with the term, but at the time a meme was strictly used to refer to like what a gene is to a physical body, a meme is to the mind, essentially. The Spider Queen invades the Third Kingdom, attempting to take over the collective unconscious like a virus. It would finally be stopped by Animal Man, however, who would use the soul of the world, which is born from the unification of the Three Kingdoms, to achieve the form of God, defeating this virus of imagination before it could take over. I also talked about all of this in my Animal Man video, but at the time I was unaware of what the imaginal realms really were, and this for sure helped me to understand it. In a similar manner, what exactly happened at the end of Swamp Thing Volume 2 is much clearer to me now. Throughout the storyline, it is repeatedly noted that should Swamp Thing ever unite the Parliaments, he will surpass the Presence himself, with him clearly being a rival to his power before ever uniting with the last Parliament, that being the Parliament of Flames. It's his unification with the last Parliament that causes him to transcend the Presence. It was after this transcendence that the Swamp Thing would come upon a new realization, that there was once a united consciousness, a god of sorts, that used to exist before it was splintered into infinity, and his unification of the Parliaments had resurrected this god in Swamp Thing. I think it makes sense for this god to be Hecate, considering we already know that she is significantly beyond the Presence, and was at the time effectively sealed away. We also know that the Presence and the other gods created Eclipso out of fear for Hecate, so it makes sense that the Presence would be so afraid of Swamp Thing reclaiming her power as the manifestation of the collective unconscious. This also implies that every member of the Parliament of Worlds is its own god similar to Hecate. Weaker of course because of Earth's unique minds, but still pretty interesting. Again, this was something I covered in my Swamp Thing video, but the context for everything that happened in it has changed because of what I can now prove in this video. Just to add on to this more as well, Despero, another character I covered in a different video, was in an unliving state. He was not alive and yet not dead either, outside the embrace of either. He was formless, soulless, and without a conscious mind, but despite this he could still dream, and it was these unconscious dreams that allowed him to return. Death can go to a lot of places, even other creations like Lucifer's creation, but the one place she can't go is into the Overvoid. And Despero was outside of this influence, but he could still interact with the collective unconscious, kind of implying that it extends outside of creation into the Overvoid. Which makes sense because Perpetua was given this force before creation existed at all. Anyway, I've spent long enough talking about this one cosmological structure, so next I'd like to move on to Maha Pralaya and the Sea of Brahma. There are so many things that could be said about what exactly Pralaya is, especially since we are given so little about her. She is the original darkness that existed before God, the source from which all things emerged. Pralaya's mere thoughts manifested as creatures which were able to destroy and devour all of creation. She also claims to be beyond the distinction of goddess, implying a superiority to Hecate, who is a goddess, and that her true form would utterly destroy the minds of the Justice League Dark, including Zatanna, which is interesting because Zatanna has been able to observe Hecate and her opposite, the Upside Down Man, without much trouble. She also describes the sleep of Brahma as a state beyond all dreams and consciousness, and that the dream of reality has been born and died within her countless times. Considering she is the original darkness that the light was born from, that either implies that Pralaya is the great darkness, or that she is what the darkness was like when these two things were the same. After all, the great darkness is just the darkness displaced by the light of creation, implying that there is a lot more darkness out there. This also means that Hecate must have been born from Pralaya along with the Upside Down Man many times over, which does fit nicely given that they are two sides of the same coin. This does raise some questions, however, since Hecate and her opposite were, by some steps removed, created by Pralaya, and Perpetua was effectively given Hecate as a tool. So does this imply that Pralaya gave Perpetua Hecate as a tool that she could use? Or was it stolen and taken by the rulers of the greater Omniverse? Or any number of other possible explanations. It's unclear at this stage, but it is fun to think about the implications. Next, I want to talk about Azarath. Not that there is much to say about it really. It's a realm that exists outside of all dimensions, and when it was destroyed by Trigon, nothing was left except the white expanse of the Overvoid and some rocks. Despite this, the rest of creation was fine, which effectively shows that Azarath floats around out there in the Overvoid somewhere. There certainly could be more to it, but for now, that's the information we have to work with, and it's not really contradictory to anything that we know already. This also explains why it's so difficult for Trigon to enter creation, because much like it's difficult for the other kind to enter creation, traversing the Overvoid is basically just really difficult because it's so big. Next, I'm going to cover the Rock of Eternity, which isn't necessarily outside of the source, but it is sometimes depicted that way. The Rock of Eternity lies at the centre of the multiverse, but it is also depicted as existing before, below, and outside of creation. All dimensions are accessible from the Rock of Eternity, and it exists outside of time and space. Time is said to hold no sway at the Rock of Eternity, and even the fifth dimension can be reached from it. There is also an opposite to the Rock of Eternity, called the Rock of Finality, which we really don't know much about other than that it exists and the wizard can send you there. Next, there is, for lack of a better term, Paradox's world. Paradox was able to unlock the secrets of time, seeing all of time on a higher scale as a god pulling back the curtain, and despite this was able to travel to and create a realm outside of time, implying that it exists before and outside of creation. The realm was retroactively removed from existence when Paradox was killed. To somewhat lend into this more, it is also said that the source will end when time ends, kind of implying that things outside of the other end of time should also be outside of the source, or separate from the source at the very least. The O-worlds are planets that somehow form outside of creation. They exist beyond conventional time, beyond the laws of science, and even the laws of magic. Only one of these planets is known to have survived to maturity, and it is the home of Starro. It is a planet that, instead of starting with simple life and diverging out to complexity, this planet started at its most complex and ended up with only one life form, that being Starro. I did a whole video on Starro for those interested in that. But yeah, considering how far out magic goes, I mean it's accessible from even the Shadowlands, far beyond creation, these planets should definitely exist out past the Sourcewall somewhere. There are of course other creations out here past the Sourcewall as well, like Lucifer's creation and Multiverse 2, which was devoured by the Gentry. And yes, Multiverse 2 is its own creation. It's stated in Multiversity that the Gentry were threatening all of creation, implying that they were going to do the same thing that they did to Multiverse 2 already. Grant Morrison elaborated in an interview that there are actually infinite creations out there in the Overvoid when asked about this story. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. I do intend to cover other parts of the cosmology in the future, particularly going into detail on the realms of the Godsphere, and perhaps some other places that don't really fit in anywhere else, like the Speed Force. In any case, I will see you all in the next one.